This is Tom Bain, and this is Wine, Money, and Song. Please press the like button and please subscribe if you enjoy the content and let other people know who are interested in wine. On September 28th this year in New York, Zachy's Auctions put on a tasting for an auction they were going to have from this great collection that featured 1990, 1989, and 1982 Bordeaux's. And this tasting was for people who were interested in bidding on the auction for these wines. And I want to thank Connor Kriegel, who invited me to the tasting to have my experience there, and I really appreciated the opportunity, and it was a great event. And the wines were sensational. And I'm going to go through the wines, but I want to thank Connor and Zachy's for just doing this. And it was Buco Restaurant on 47th Bond Street who did a great job in putting it on. And their sommeliers did an outstanding job in servicing us. And the food was good too. So I'm going to get into the 1990 and the 1989 because they were back-to-back vintages, but we're going to talk about 82 separately because of its heralded vintage. But all three of those vintages are very hot vintages. And you see this in Bordeaux. Great vintages like 28, 29, 61, 45, 47, 82, 89, and 90. Very, very warm vintages, hot vintages. So keep that in mind. So the 89 and 90, the way I feel about these vintages generally is the 89 was considered to be, when they harvested, one of the great vintages in 100 years in the last century. I remember reading a headline in the New York Times, one of the greatest vintages of the century, 1989. It didn't turn out that way. Now, there's some outstanding 89s, and the 2 or 3 wines that are at the top of the list in 89 are probably better than the wines from 90, the top. But 1990 was much more consistent through all the appellations in Bordeaux. So you had a few superstars in 89, but a lot of underperformers in 89. Now 89, the 89 wines, a lot of people waited too long to pick, and a lot of the wines had problems. They had stuck fermentations, or they just were they didn't really come out balanced. The 1990s, every appellation did well. And First Growths did great in 89, except for Aubryon. Really, they underperformed. So we're going to get into tasting the wines. So before I go into my tasting notes on these wines, my presence at the tasting was because I was in the Bordeaux importing business for over 2 decades, and I tasted the 1982s out of barrel, the 89s out of barrel, and the 90s. So I can give a perspective that's has a big window, a long window, and also I bought a lot of the wines. I've been drinking a lot of the wines over the last 20 or 30 years. So that's why I was included in this. So we'll start with the 1990 vintage. And the thing about 1990 is it comes right after the 89. And I'm going to reverse that. I'm going to do the 89s first because they had an effect on the 90s. So let me do it that way. The 89s, as I said, everyone thought it was going to be this great vintage, blah, 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 blah. And some of the wines were disappointing. But there were some great wines. And as I said, it was a very hot harvest. It was very early budding and flowering, very warm in the summer, but both 89 and 90 got a lot of rain. I shouldn't say a lot of rain, but it got a lot of moisture at the right times. It's very key when you have a hot vintage that you need hydration so that the wines don't dry out and get too alcoholic and don't plump up, and the tannin levels get to be so high. So you need rain at the proper time. Both 89 and 90 both got rain late in the harvest without pouring rain. That they got 2 solid weeks of rain at the right time, and you know how that works. And it makes for the harvest, and the Cabernet and the Merlot can ripen because they're late ripening compared to Merlot. So the 89s. I'm going to start off with the best wine. 89 Haut-Brion is considered to be one of the great wines made in Bordeaux, and I don't disagree with it. It is a wine of structure, ripeness. It's a great Haut-Brion. And it's one of the few wines that really achieved a stupendous level of quality. And I don't know how they were able to really separate themselves from most of the other wines in 89. And it's just the mouthfeel, the ripeness, the richness, and the typical minerality, graveliness of the soil. Then we have Le Mission Haut-Brion, which is right next door, and you would think it would taste very similar, but it doesn't. On its own, it's an outstanding wine, Le Mission 89. Very, very minerally, but not as big, not as round, but very, very well done, balanced, and a lot of terroir in the wine. And ripe, but anything in comparison to Haut-Brion pales, but it's still an excellent to great wine. Then we have Lafite, 89 Lafite. And 89 Lafite has been disappointing to me. I've had it a number of times, and it's a very good wine, it's an excellent wine, but to me the flavors are a little dilute. And it was very controversial in this tasting. Some people liked it, some people didn't. To me, I wouldn't write it off, but to me it's just a little dilute. Then the 89, I bought a bottle of Ozone with me to the tasting to add. And the Ozone was made by Pascal Delbach, and he used to pick early, and he used to craft very, very elegant, traditional Bordeaux's. And this wine stood out against all the other wines we tasted that night. The sommelier there said, this wine's an outlier. And I says, you're right. I says, because this guy picks early, makes very balanced, minerally, really super terroir wines. And the wine was just delicious, delicious, complex, without being very overly ripe. And it stood out that they don't make wine like this in Bordeaux anymore. And Ozone was sold, I think, around 1994 or something. And the wines are very different now. But the 89 Ozone was super. And the last wine was La Fleur. And La Fleur, as you know, is a very tiny production. The 89 showed a little disjointed, but had a lot of ripeness, had a lot of grip, and still needs time. So let's go to the 1990s. And the 1990s, let me check the harvest date. I think it was like the 13th of September, the 12th of September. And the 89 was very, very earlier, by the way, was 818. Okay. So Let's begin with Margaux. 1990 Margaux, and I've had that quite a number of times. And it was excellent. I've had times when I thought it might have been too ripe formally, but it showed super. Liked the wine immensely. The Mission Haut-Brion was very balanced, very good, very, very typical of Les Missions. The third wine was Pichon Baron, and Pichon Baron to me was the weakest wine we tasted. It tasted a bit overripe, and I didn't feel it was balanced. It was a bit overripe. It wasn't harmonious. Now, I've had the wine several times. It's highly rated, but it just might be showing that way. And then we had 90 La Fleur, and the fruit in La Fleur was so exotic and ripe and round and absolutely, full of splendor. And there's so much going on in that wine, and the wine is still very young. And the last wine of the 90s was Montrose. And that's another one that I've had a lot of times, and there were a few times when I thought it might have been on the borderline of being overripe and stuff, but this showed tremendously. The bottle we had of the 90 Montrose, center staff coming right out, hitting you with that soil, with that clay, and it was ripe, but beautifully round and great length.